They thought the lapel mic was off and the live stream camera was just panning the crowd. But while I was backstage bleeding for his company, millions watched my husband wrap his arms around his secretary at my $4.2 million expo. That embrace didn't just prove his infidelity, it exposed a blue folder holding the corporation's darkest financial secrets. They thought I was finished, but I was actually holding the key to take back everything they stole. My name is Morgan Vance, and at 34 years old, I had just pulled off the impossible. The Helios Tech Summit was not just an event, it was a $4.2 million lifeline for the Sterling family empire, a desperate gasp for air that I had personally resuscitated. Standing in the shadows of the wings, I watched the lights sweep over the crowd of 3,000 potential investors. My feet were bleeding inside my Louboutins, a physical testament to the 20 hours a day I had worked for the last 6 months. I had selected every canapé, calibrated every spotlight, and personally vetted every name on the VIP list to ensure the Sterling stock did not tank come Monday morning. Preston, my husband and the supposed CEO, strode onto the stage. He looked every inch the golden boy in his bespoke Italian suit, flashing that bright, hollow smile that worked so well on magazine covers. This was a massive team effort. Preston boomed into the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd for applause while I stood alone in the dark, holding his cue cards. We could not have done this without the tireless dedication of the entire Sterling family. He never mentioned my name. He never did. I felt a presence beside me and stiffened. It was Serena, the new marketing director. She was 22, incompetent, and wore perfume that smelled like cheap ambition. I had tried to warn Preston about her lack of qualifications weeks ago. "You are being paranoid, Morgan," he had said, dismissing me with a wave of his manicured hand. "Serena is fresh energy. You are just stressed." "I am not stressed, Preston. I am the only one working." I had snapped back, but as usual, my voice drowned in his ego. Now, the event was peaking. The investors were biting. I could see the digital tickers on the side monitors showing capital inflows hitting $50 million. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since January. We were safe. I had saved us. Suddenly, the audio feedback screeched in my earpiece. The stage-left mic was cutting out. Panic surged through me. I abandoned my post and sprinted toward the soundboard, barking orders at the tech crew. "Cut channel 4, reroute to the backup now," I yelled, my eyes glued to the mixing console, fingers flying over the knobs. I did not see the massive LED screen behind the main stage flicker. I did not see the camera operator, bored and panning for footage, swing his lens toward the dimly lit corridor just off stage, and I certainly did not see what the live stream broadcasted to 2 million viewers online. Preston had stepped off stage and pulled Serena into the shadows. It was not a friendly hug. His hands lingered on her waist, pulling her flush against him. They held each other for 10 long seconds, whispering something that ended with a smirk shared between conspirators. It was intimate. It was possessive. And it was broadcast in high-definition 4K resolution on the wall behind me while I frantically fixed a loose cable. By the time I looked up, the screen had returned to the company logo. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, oblivious to the disaster that had just unfolded. 10 minutes later, as the applause died down, I expected a glass of champagne. Instead, a security guard tapped my shoulder. "Mrs. Sterling wants to see you in the VIP holding room. Now." I walked in, expecting a thank you. Constance Sterling, my mother-in-law, sat in a velvet armchair, sipping sparkling water. She did not offer me a seat. "The event was a success." "Constance," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We hit the target." Constance placed her glass down with a sharp clink. She looked at me with eyes devoid of warmth. "You are fired, Morgan." I blinked, sure I had misheard due to the ringing in my ears. "Excuse me." "Effective immediately," she said, smoothing her skirt. "We have found irregularities in the budget. Embezzlement. It is disgusting that you would steal from family after we took you in." "That is a lie," I whispered, my hands starting to shake. "I accounted for every cent. I saved this company." "You are a liability." Constance spat, standing up. "Security will escort you out. Do not make a scene, or I will call the police. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk." I stood there, the adrenaline of the night turning into cold ash in my veins. I had built them a throne of gold, and they had just kicked me off the steps. Preston walked into the room, but the man I loved was gone. In his place stood a stranger with eyes like ice. He tossed a manila envelope onto the mahogany table between us. It slid across the polished surface and stopped right at my trembling fingertips. "We have the bank records, Morgan," Preston said, his voice devoid of any familiar warmth. "$50,000 in kickbacks from the lighting vendor, deposited straight into an account under your maiden name." "Preston, that is impossible," I stammered, my chest tightening until it felt like my ribs were cracking. "You know I would never. I don't even have an offshore account." "Save the acting for the judge," he sneered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. "Sign the divorce papers. You leave with nothing. No alimony, no settlement, no claim on the company. If you fight this," I hand this file to the district attorney, "you will go to prison for fraud." I tried to grab his arm, desperate to find a shred of the husband who had held me that morning, but he recoiled as if I were contagious. Before I could scream, 2 burly security guards materialized in the doorway. They grabbed me by my elbows, their grip bruisingly tight. "Get off me," I screamed, digging my heels into the plush carpet. "I designed this building, I chose these walls. You cannot throw me out of my own creation." They did not listen. They dragged me through the atrium I had spent 3 months renovating, past the receptionist who refused to meet my eyes, and shoved me out the revolving doors. I stumbled onto the wet pavement, the rain instantly soaking my silk blouse. I reached into my pocket for my car keys, but the head of security, a man I had bought a birthday gift for just last week, blocked my path. "Company car, Ms. Vance," he said, holding out his hand. "And the phone, and the laptop. They are all sterling assets." "Please, it is pouring," I begged, shivering as the cold water ran down my back. "How am I supposed to get home?" "Not my problem," he replied, snatching my purse and dumping its contents onto the wet concrete. He took the phone and the keys, leaving me scrambling to pick up my lipstick and a few crumpled bills from the puddle. I managed to hail a cab to our penthouse, praying my personal credit card still worked. When I arrived, the doorman, who had known me for 8 years, looked straight through me. I jammed my key card into the slot. The light flashed red. Denied. I tried again. Red. "Mr. Sterling has changed the codes," the doorman said, staring at the wall behind me. "You are not on the list anymore." I ran to the nearest ATM, shoving my debit card in with shaking hands. Card declined, account frozen. I stood there in the rain, water dripping off my nose, realizing I had exactly $60 in cash in my pocket. I went to Clara's house, my supposed best friend. I pounded on her oak door, shivering and humiliated. I saw the curtain twitch. I saw her look right at me. Then the lights inside went out. No one was going to help me. They were all terrified of the Sterling influence. 2 hours later, I was sitting on a bus heading to the south side of the city, surrounded by the smell of stale sweat and exhaust. I got off at a neighborhood where the streetlights did not work. I found a motel with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying fly. $40 a night, the clerk grunted, not even looking up from his magazine. Cash up front. I handed over most of my remaining money and walked into room 104. The carpet was sticky. The sheets were gray. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at the peeling wallpaper. 8 years. I had given them 8 years of my life, my creativity, my soul. I had built their legacy while they played golf and shopped. And now, I was worth less than the dirt on their shoes. I turned on the small, boxy television to drown out the sound of my own sobbing. The news was on. The headline read, "Helios Summit a Triumph." And there they were, Preston and Serena, standing side by side on the stage I had built. Serena was beaming, clutching a bouquet of roses that should have been mine. "It was a vision we shared," Preston was saying to the reporter, his arm protectively around Serena. "A new era for Sterling." I watched them, shivering in my wet clothes, feeling the cold settle deep into my bones. I had nothing. No husband, no home, no money, and no name. I was zero. 2 months had passed since I was thrown out into the rain, and my life had shrunk to the size of a grease stain on a polyester apron. I was no longer Morgan Vance, the event architect. I was just the nameless woman refilling water glasses for $12 an hour at a third-rate catering company. My hands, which used to sign million-dollar vendor contracts and hold crystal flutes, were now raw and red. The skin around my knuckles was cracked from constant exposure to industrial dish soap, and my fingernails were cut short to hide the grime that never seemed to wash away. Every night, I soaked them in cheap lotion, but the sting was a constant reminder of how far I had fallen. On a Tuesday night, my manager assigned me to a private art gallery opening in the Upper East Side. I tried to refuse, pleading illness, but he told me if I did not show up, I was fired. I needed the money for the motel, so I went. As soon as I walked through the service entrance, my stomach dropped. I recognized the perfume in the air. I recognized the cut of the suits. This was my old world. I pulled my cap down low, praying the dim lighting would protect me. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, collecting empty glasses, keeping my eyes on the floor. I was almost done with my shift when a pair of red stilettos stepped directly into my path. "Well, if it isn't the disgraced ex-wife," a voice purred. I froze. I slowly looked up to see Serena standing there, clutching a glass of expensive Pinot Noir. She was wearing a dress from the new season collection, draped in diamonds that Preston had likely bought with company funds. Preston stood right behind her, holding a whiskey, looking uncomfortable but compliant. "Please, I am just doing my job," I whispered, clutching my tray so hard my knuckles turned white. "Let me pass." "Your job?" Serena laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "I thought your job was spending Preston's money. It is good to see you finally learning the value of hard work." She took a sip of her wine, her eyes locking onto mine with malicious intent. Then, with a theatrical gasp, she tilted her glass. The dark red liquid splashed all over her pristine white shoes and pooled onto the gallery floor. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake shock. "Look what you made me do! You bumped into me, you clumsy idiot!" The chatter in the room stopped. All eyes turned to us. My former business partners, people I had dined with, watched in silence. No one stepped forward. "Clean it up," Serena commanded, pointing to her shoe. "Now!" I stood there, humiliated heat rising up my neck. I looked at Preston, silently begging him to stop this madness. He took a step forward, shaking his head with a look of pity that made me want to scream. "Morgan, look at yourself," Preston said, his voice low enough that only we could hear. "If you had just signed the papers early, you would not be suffering like this. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I looked at the wine on the floor. I looked at the smirk on Serena's face. If I walked away, I lost the job. If I lost the job, I lost the roof over my head. I slowly lowered myself to my knees. I pulled a rag from my apron pocket. "Good girl," Serena sneered. I wiped the wine from her shoes. I scrubbed the floor until the rag was soaked red. I did not cry. I refused to give them that satisfaction. But as I stared at the floor, something inside me snapped. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard block of ice in my chest. I finished, stood up without a word, and walked back to the kitchen, leaving my dignity on the floor with the dirty rag. That night, Back in my damp motel room, I sat on the bed in the dark. I had avoided the internet for 60 days, too afraid to see the lies they were spreading about me. But the rage I felt tonight was stronger than the fear. I turned on my cheap prepaid smartphone and downloaded TikTok. I did not even have to search for it. The algorithm served it to me immediately. It was the top trending video in the country with 20 million views. The thumbnail was the stage at the Helios Summit. The title read, "The Billion-Dollar Hug That Exposed Everything." I clicked play, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched the live stream footage from 2 months ago. I saw myself running to the soundboard. I saw the camera pan. And then, I saw what the entire world had been watching while I was scrubbing floors. I saw Preston. I saw Serena. And I saw something else that made my breath hitch in my throat. The internet didn't care about the corporate espionage aspect of the video. The comments section was ablaze with gossip, analyzing the way Preston's hand slid down the curve of Serena's back, dubbing it the billion-dollar grope. But as I sat on the lumpy mattress of my motel room, huddled under a thin blanket, I was not watching my husband's infidelity. I was watching the crime. I must have replayed that 10-second clip 300 times. My thumb hovered over the timeline, scrubbing back and forth, frame by frame. I was not looking at their faces anymore. I was fixated on the bottom left corner of the screen. The live stream had been broadcast in 4K resolution, a technological boast I had insisted on to impress the tech giants in the audience. Now, that obsession with high-definition quality was the only weapon I had left. Serena was not just embracing him, she was clutching a folder against her chest, pinning it between their bodies as if it were a shield. It was blue. In the sterling corporate structure, color coding was law. Black was for general administration, red was for public relations, but blue was classified financial data, restricted strictly to the chief executive officer and the chief financial officer. Even as his wife, I was never allowed to touch the blue files. I pinched the screen of my cracked phone, expanding the image until the pixels began to blur at the edges. The text on the label was partially obscured by Serena's thumb, but the high contrast of the stage lights made the bold, capitalized letters jump out at me. Project Phoenix Virtual Capital List. The air left my lungs. I knew that name. My mind raced back to a rainy afternoon 6 months ago in Preston's office. I had found an invoice for Phoenix Consulting for $200,000 and asked him about it. "It is just a charity initiative, Morgan," Preston had said, not even looking up from his laptop. "We are digging wells in somewhere. Do not worry your pretty little head about tax write-offs." I had believed him. I had trusted him. But Project Phoenix was not a charity. It was a ghost. My hands started to tremble. But this time it was not from cold or hunger. It was from the adrenaline of realization. The Sterling family had used my $4.2 million expo as a washing machine. They were funneling money through shell companies like Phoenix to inflate their revenue streams artificially. They were pumping up the company's valuation with non-existent capital to drive up the stock price before the initial public offering next week. Everything suddenly snapped into focus, like a lens finally finding its subject. I remembered the weird invoices from vendors I had never met. I remembered the sudden, frantic push to launch the IPO a year early. I remembered the nervous sweat on the chief financial officer's brow when I asked why the catering budget was double what I had quoted. I scrambled off the bed and frantically searched the room for something to write with. I found a dried-out marker in the drawer and grabbed the stack of free local newspapers from the nightstand. I started tearing out pages, taping them to the peeling floral wallpaper with Band-Aids I had in my purse. I drew a circle in the center, the IPO. From there, I drew jagged lines connecting the dots. The blue folder proved they were keeping 2 sets of books. The expo budget was the cover for the inflated assets. And then, the final line, the one that made my blood boil. "They did not fire me because of the embezzlement lie," I whispered to the empty, silent room. "They fired me because I was the only one who actually checked the receipts. If I had stayed, I would have found the discrepancies during the post-event audit. I was the liability, not because I was stealing, but because I was honest. The hug, the public humiliation, the rush to seize my laptop and lock me out of the server, it was all a calculated demolition to silence the only witness before the company went public. I stepped back and looked at my wall of evidence. The layout looked like the mind of a madwoman, scrawled in black ink over used car advertisements. But it was the clearest thing I had seen in months. "You think you are clever, Preston," I said, tracing the line that connected his face on the screen to the blue folder. "But you just handed me the gun." I knew that walking into a courtroom with a court-appointed lawyer against the Sterling legal team would be suicide. I needed a shark, someone who smelled blood in the water and did not care about the consequences. That was when I remembered Arthur Vance. We shared a last name, though we were not related. But what we really shared was a history of being stabbed in the back by my husband. 10 years ago, Preston had stolen a patent from Arthur that became the foundation of the Sterling Empire. Arthur had sworn revenge, but he had been waiting in the shadows ever since. I found him where the rumors said he would be, in a dimly lit jazz bar in the lower district called the Velvet Note. The air smelled of expensive cigars and old leather. I counted the crumpled bills in my pocket, my tips from 3 nights of scrubbing floors. It was exactly $40. I walked up to the bartender. "A glass of your 25-year-old single malt," I said. "Send it to the man in the corner booth." Arthur Vance looked older than his photos. He sat alone, tapping his fingers to the rhythm of the saxophone. When the waiter placed the drink in front of him and pointed to me, Arthur's eyes narrowed. He did not touch the glass. I walked over and stood before him, feeling the holes in my sneakers but keeping my chin high. "Mr. Vance," I said, "I have a business proposition." Arthur laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I do not talk to Sterlings, and I certainly do not talk to Preston's cast-off wife. Get out of my sight before I have security throw you out." "I am not a Sterling anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. "And if you throw me out, you lose the only chance you will ever have to see Preston beg for mercy." Arthur picked up the glass, swirled the amber liquid, and looked at me with disdain. "You are a spy. Preston sent you here to feed me false intel so he can sue me for libel when I bite. I am not stupid, little girl. He is inflating the assets for the IPO," I said quickly, dropping the bait before he could look away. "Project Phoenix. It is a shell game. The capital does not exist." Arthur paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Phoenix. That is a bold accusation without proof." "The proof is in the viral video," I replied, sitting down opposite him without being invited. "The blue folder Serena is holding. It is the ledger for the fake accounts. But that is not why I am here. I do not just have a theory. Arthur, I have the gun." He leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." "They fired me. They took my laptop. They locked me out of the servers," I said, leaning in closer. "But in their arrogance, they forgot about the venue contract. Because of the pyrotechnics used at the expo, the convention center required a personal liability signature, not a corporate one. Preston was too busy drinking champagne, so I signed it. My personal digital signature is on the master lease." Arthur's eyes glittered in the dim light. "So you are liable for damages. So what? Clause 14, Section B," I recited from memory. "The signing organizer retains exclusive copyright and ownership of all raw digital data captured within the venue during the rental period. That includes the security feeds, that includes the back-end server logs, and that includes the unedited audio from the stage microphones." Arthur set his glass down slowly. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You own the data," he whispered. "You own the evidence of the fraud." "I legally own every byte of data generated in that building for those 48 hours. I confirmed. "Preston thinks he owns it because he paid for the servers. He is wrong." "But I have no money to enforce the contract. I need a lawyer who is not afraid of the Sterling family." Arthur sat back, looking at me with a new respect. You do not want a settlement, do you? I want to burn it down, I said cold and hard. I want to leave him with exactly what he left me. 0. Arthur raised his glass in a toast. I do not care about the money. Morgan, I have plenty of that. But watching Preston Sterling crumble that is priceless. You have your funding. With the ink on Arthur's retainer agreement barely dry, I moved with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. I drafted a formal legal demand to the server hosting company, citing Clause 14B of the rental agreement. I attached a copy of my driver's license and my digital signature key. I did not ask for permission. I demanded my property. The reaction from the Sterling camp was instantaneous. 3 hours later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the cracked parking lot of my motel, looking like a spaceship that had crash-landed in a swamp. I watched through the blinds as the Sterling family's chief legal counsel, Marcus Thorne, stepped out. He adjusted his silk tie, looking at the peeling paint of my door with open disgust before knocking 3 times. I opened the door, holding my phone openly in my hand. Ms. Vance, Marcus said, his voice smooth and oily. We are aware of your request to the data firm. That data is proprietary Sterling property. If you do not rescind the request within 1 hour, we will file a restraining order and sue you for industrial espionage. You cannot afford a coffee, let alone a defense. I didn't blink. I didn't tremble. I pressed the stop button on the voice recorder app on my screen. This is a one-party consent state, Marcus, I said, my voice dead calm. I just recorded you threatening a witness in an active investigation. Get off my porch, or I send this to the Bar Association. Marcus's jaw tightened. He glared at me, realizing the scared little housewife he expected had been replaced by something much more dangerous. He turned on his heel and marched back to his car without another word. By the next morning, the courier arrived with a terabyte hard drive. I took it straight to Arthur's office. We plugged it into his isolated system, and the files populated the screen. There were thousands of hours of video, but I went straight to the raw audio feeds. The lapel microphones used at the expo were high-frequency transmitters. Even when the main speakers were muted, the transmitters often stayed live to the recording deck unless manually killed at the pack. Preston, in his arrogance, had forgotten to flip the switch on his belt. Arthur handed me a set of noise-canceling headphones. I clicked the file time-stamped to the moment of the hug. The audio was crystal clear. It cut through the ambient noise of the crowd like a knife. "Smile for the cameras, baby," Preston's voice whispered in my ear, intimate and sickening. "We pulled it off. The valuation is skyrocketing." "What about her?" Serena's voice asked, sounding bored. "She is still asking questions about the Phoenix invoices." "Let her ask," Preston laughed, a dark, ugly sound. "As soon as the stock hits the market next week, I am kicking that idiot to the curb. We take the liquidity from the IPO, transfer it to the Caymans, and let the company burn. She can have the ashes." I took the headphones off, my hands shaking, not from sadness, but from the sheer power of what I held. It was a confession. It was conspiracy to commit securities fraud. It was a smoking gun loaded with nuclear warheads. "We do not file for divorce," Arthur said, leaning back in his leather chair with a shark-like grin. "We file for Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act violations. We hit them for fraud, copyright infringement, and breach of fiduciary duty. For the next 72 hours, we did not sleep. We built a lawsuit that was less of a legal document and more of an execution order. While Arthur handled the legal phrasing, I opened my old contact list. I called the lighting director who was owed $100,000. I called the florist who was on the brink of bankruptcy because Sterling had stiffed her for $50,000. I called the caterers, the security firm, and the decorators. "They are going public next week," I told them, one by one. "If they cash out, you never get paid. Join me." I formed a coalition of 20 angry creditors. We were an army of the unpaid and the ignored. 2 days before the initial public offering, A blind item appeared on a major financial news blog hinting at a massive lawsuit targeting a tech giant about to go public. The rumors swirled. The sterling stock, which had been climbing in the pre-market trading, suddenly stuttered. It dropped 2%, then 3%. I sat in Arthur's office, watching the red ticker on the screen. The trap was set. They were walking right into it. The process server walked into the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. It was supposed to be the coronation of the new sterling power couple, an engagement party dripping in diamonds and arrogance. Instead, just as Preston raised a crystal flute to toast Serena, a man in a cheap suit handed him a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the federal court. The music reportedly stopped instantly. My phone began to vibrate on the table in Arthur's office 10 minutes later. It buzzed incessantly, dancing across the mahogany surface like an angry hornet. The screen flashed the name Preston. When I did not answer, the messages started flooding in. "We can settle this. $5 million. Cash wire transfer tonight. Just sign a non-disclosure agreement and withdraw the data request. $5 million. A year ago, I would have thought that was a fortune. Now, it just looked like fear. I picked up the phone, but I did not hit call. Instead, I opened the photo gallery. I selected a high-resolution screenshot of the viral video, specifically the frame where his hand was on her waist and her hand was clutching the blue folder. I typed a single sentence beneath it. "The real value is not in the video. Preston, it is in the audio." I hit send. Almost immediately, the buzzing stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization that I was not looking for a payout. I was looking for an autopsy of his career. According to my sources inside the finance department, people I had hired who were now terrified of going to jail. Serena cracked first. She did not trust Preston to save her. Within an hour of my text, she was logged into her private banking app, frantically transferring her personal assets into offshore accounts, unknowingly triggering suspicious activity alerts that Arthur had already flagged with the authorities. She looked at Preston and saw a sinking ship, and she was scrambling for the only life raft she cared about: her money. 2 days later, I made my return to the public eye. I did not hide in the shadows. I stood in front of a wall of cameras at the Four Seasons, wearing a white suit that cost more than my entire catering salary. Beside me stood Arthur Vance, looking grim and powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice commanding the room, "I am proud to introduce the CEO of Vance Strategic Auditing, Ms. Morgan Vance." The flashbulbs blinded me for a second, but I did not blink. I stepped to the microphone. I did not mention Preston. I did not mention the affair. I played the role of the concerned industry expert. "We have seen recently how fragile corporate governance can be," I said, leaning into the microphone, my voice steady and cool. "When organizers prioritize personal gratification over investor security, the entire market suffers. My new firm is dedicated to exposing the hidden costs of these so-called successful events. We specialize in finding what is hidden in the noise." The reporters knew exactly who I was talking about. The headline the next morning was not about a scorned wife. It was Morgan Vance questions sterling solvency. The market reacted with violent swiftness. The institutional investors, the ones who controlled the pension funds and the massive capital injections, began to pull their commitments. They smelled a rat. The sterling IPO was considered toxic before the opening bell even rang. That evening, a former assistant of mine who was still working at the Sterling Mansion sent me a text. She described the scene in the drawing room. The stress had finally caused the facade to crumble. You stupid girl," Constance had shrieked, her voice echoing through the house. According to my source, Constance had cornered Serena by the fireplace. "You were supposed to be the marketing genius. How could you not check the microphone? You were holding the evidence in your hand while you let him grope you." I didn't know," Serena had sobbed, backing away. "Preston said it was safe. He said she was too stupid to notice." Constance didn't listen. She slapped Serena across the face, a sharp, cracking sound that silenced the room. "She built this company," Constance hissed, her face purple with rage. "And you two just handed it back to her on a silver platter." I read the text and took a sip of my tea. The panic was setting in. They were turning on each other, just as I knew they would, but they had no idea that the real blow was yet to land in court. The air in the courtroom was thick with the scent of floor wax and desperation. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be a formality, but Marcus Thorne, the lead counsel for the Sterling family, had decided to turn it into a character assassination. He paced in front of the judge, gesturing wildly toward where I sat at the defense table. "Your Honor, let us look at the reality of the plaintiff." Thorne sneered, adjusting his glasses. "Ms. Vance is not a credible witness. For the past 2 months, she has been scraping leftovers off plates as a waitress. She is destitute, desperate, and clearly vindictive. This lawsuit is nothing more than a shakedown by a woman angry that her lifestyle has been cut off." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. Beside me, Arthur Vance sketched idly on a notepad. Looking bored, Thorne was not finished. He turned to the gallery, playing to the reporters in the back row. "Furthermore, we have expert testimony suggesting that the so-called incriminating video is a fabrication. We believe Ms. Vance used advanced artificial intelligence to alter the audio track, inserting words my client never spoke. It is a deep fake, Your Honor, created to destroy a reputable company." A murmur ran through the courtroom. I felt the eyes of the jury pool on me. They expected the waitress to shrink. They expected the scorned wife to cry. I stood up. "Your Honor, may I address the technical specifics of the evidence directly?" Thorne laughed. "Objection. Ms. Vance is not a forensic expert." "I am the architect of the system in question," I said, my voice cutting through his laughter. "I designed the audio network for the Helios Summit. I know more about those microphones than anyone in this room." The judge looked over his spectacles. "I will allow it. Keep it brief." I walked to the center of the room. I did not need notes. "The lapel microphones used were Series 9 digital transmitters," I explained, turning to face Thorne. "They embed a unique, encrypted time code into the raw file every millisecond. This metadata is locked the moment it hits the server. If even 1 pixel of video or 1 frequency of audio is altered, the encryption key breaks." I signaled to the bailiff to hand a document to the judge. "This is a forensic report from a third-party data firm in Switzerland." I continued. "They verified the hash keys of the file I retrieved. The keys are intact. That means the video is 100% authentic. No AI, no edits. Just Preston Sterling's voice. Unadulterated and undeniable." Thorne's face drained of color. He started to stammer an objection, but Arthur stood up, dropping a heavy binder onto the table with a loud thud that made everyone jump. "And if we are talking about credibility," Arthur boomed, his voice filling the room, "I would like to submit Exhibit B. This is a list of 12 vendors, all personally contracted by Ms. Vance, who are currently owed a combined total of $3 million by the Sterling Group. They have all signed affidavits confirming that the company has ceased payments." The judge flipped through the binder, his eyebrows knitting together. He looked from the documents to Preston, who was sitting behind his lawyer, sweating profusely. "This court finds sufficient probable cause to suspect financial malfeasance," the judge declared, banging his gavel. "I am ordering an immediate freeze on all personal and corporate assets of Preston Sterling and the Sterling Group pending a federal investigation." The silence in the room was shattered by a screech of a chair. Preston jumped up, his eyes wild, his composure completely shattered. "No!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking. "You cannot do that. You cannot freeze the accounts." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge warned. "You do not understand." "How!" Preston yelled, pushing his own lawyer aside, spittle flying from his mouth. "The money has to move today. If you freeze the accounts, the Phoenix Fund." The slush fund will be exposed. I need that liquidity to cover the—" He stopped. The entire courtroom stared at him in stunned silence. He had just admitted, on the record, to the existence of a slush fund. The operational fund, Preston whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he realized what he had done. I meant, the operational fund. Let the record show the defendant's outburst, the judge said coldly. Bailiff, please restrain Mr. Sterling. As I walked out of the courthouse 10 minutes later, the paparazzi were waiting, but they did not see a victim. They captured the image of Preston Sterling, red-faced and screaming as he was held back by his own legal team. And in the foreground, they captured me, adjusting my sunglasses, walking down the steps with the cool indifference of a woman who had just buried her past. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not knock, they kicked the doors down. Following the judge's ruling, federal agents swarmed the Sterling headquarters like locusts, seizing servers, boxes of files, and sealing the executive suites with yellow tape. The initial public offering, the event that was supposed to make the Sterling family billionaires, was canceled 48 minutes after the market opened. The company valuation did not just drop, it plummeted straight into the abyss, shedding 90% of its value in a single morning. I watched it all from the newsfeed in my new corner office, sipping lukewarm coffee. The destruction was absolute. By noon, the news broke about Serena. She had been intercepted at the international terminal of the airport, wearing a wig and sunglasses, trying to board a flight to non-extradition territory. The report stated she was carrying a suitcase filled with $200,000 in cash. I watched the footage of her being led away in handcuffs, mascara running down her cheeks, screaming that she was just following orders. She looked young and terrified, a pawn who thought she was a queen. An hour later, the ambulance sirens wailed outside the Sterling family estate. Constance Sterling, the woman who had sneered at my background for a decade, had collapsed in the foyer while watching police carry out her antique paintings as evidence. It was a mild stroke, brought on by the sudden, violent realization that the dynasty she protected with such venom was gone. I felt no pity. I felt no joy. I just felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balanced ledger. My receptionist buzzed me at 3 o'clock. Ms. Vance, there is a man here to see you. He says he is your husband. He looks unwell. Should I call security? No, I said, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. Send him in. Preston walked into my office, but he was not the man who had stood on the stage at the expo. He was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing a wrinkled shirt that looked like he had slept in it. He stopped in the middle of the room, looking at the sleek glass and steel of my new domain. He dropped to his knees. Morgan, please, he choked out, his voice cracking. You have to stop this. They are going to put me in prison for 20 years. I can't survive in there. I spun my chair around to face him. I looked at the man I had washed socks for, the man I had cooked for, the man I had built a legacy for. I searched for a spark of the love I used to feel, but there was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. You should have thought about that before you used my event to launder money. Preston, I said, my voice flat. I was weak, Constance pushed me. Serena seduced me. He blubbered, crawling forward to grab the hem of my pants. I still love you. Morgan, we can fix this. Just withdraw the evidence. Tell them it was a mistake. I kicked his hand away. Stand up. You are embarrassing yourself. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose with his sleeve, looking at me with the desperation of a drowning animal. I will give you a lifeline, Preston, I said, sliding a document across my desk. But it will cost you everything you have left. He looked at the papers, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold them. What? What is this? A transfer of ownership, I explained. I will agree to drop the civil suit for fraud and sign a statement saying the accounting errors were unintentional negligence rather than malicious intent. It might keep you out of federal prison. You will likely get probation and a heavy fine." "And in exchange," he asked, a flicker of hope in his eyes, "in exchange, you sign over the intellectual property rights to every single technology patent held by Sterling Group," I said, leaning forward. "The software, the hardware, the client lists, and the rights to the Expo brand. All of it. You transfer it to Vance Strategic Auditing, effective immediately." "But that is the whole company," Preston whispered, horror dawning on his face. "Without the IP, Sterling is just an empty shell with debt. I will be destitute." "You will be free," I corrected him. "You can start over. Wash dishes, wait tables. I hear it builds character. Or you can refuse, and I will testify at your sentencing hearing. The choice is yours. You have 60 seconds. Preston looked at the pen. He looked at me. He realized that the woman he had discarded was now the only thing standing between him and a concrete cell. I hate you," he sobbed. "The feeling is mutual," I replied. "Sign it." He grabbed the pen and scribbled his name, tears dripping onto the paper. With that ink, the Sterling Empire ceased to exist. He was crying for his loss. I was just filing the paperwork. The workman pried the last silver letter of the Sterling sign off the building facade. It crashed into the dumpster below with a heavy metallic clang that sounded like justice. I stood on the sidewalk, wearing a trench coat that cost more than my old car, looking up as the new neon sign flickered to life. It cast a brilliant, steady blue glow over the city streets. Vance Tech and Media. It was not just a name change. It was a resurrection. My first act as the owner was a purge. I called a meeting in the boardroom, the same room where Constance had fired me for a crime I did not commit. The table was filled with the Sterling loyalists, the yes men who had helped hide the slush fund. "You are all fired," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "Security will escort you out. Do not take a stapler. Do not take a pen." I replaced them with the army of the ignored. The lighting technician who had been stiffed on his invoice was now my head of operations. The florist who was nearly bankrupt became my director of events. I filled the halls with people who knew the value of hard work because they had actually done it. 6 months later, we launched the Phoenix Rising Expo. We held it in the exact same convention center where my life had fallen apart. But this time, it was twice the size. The budget was $8.4 million, every cent accounted for and paid in advance. 3,000 investors filled the hall, the energy electric and buzzing with genuine innovation rather than deceit. I walked onto the main stage, the spotlight warming my face. I looked out at the sea of faces and pointed to the massive LED screen behind me. "Transparency is not just a buzzword," I told the crowd, my voice amplified by the sound system I had personally calibrated. "It is the difference between an empire and a scam. To remind us of that, I want to show you the moment this company was truly born." I pressed the button. The infamous clip played on the screen behind me. It was the hug. It was Serena and Preston. But this time, the audio was mastered to perfection, booming clearly through the hall. Preston's voice confessing his greed and his plan to leave me with nothing echoed against the walls. The audience did not gasp this time. They applauded. I had turned my deepest humiliation into the ultimate case study for corporate ethics. I knew that somewhere in the city, in a cramped, drafty apartment with peeling paint, Preston and Constance were watching. They had been reduced to living on a meager allowance, forced to watch the world they used to rule from a cracked television screen. I imagined them walking through Times Square, looking up at the jumbo screen where my face was currently 5 stories high, realizing that every light in the city was shining for me, and they were left in the dark. As I walked off stage, the applause thundering behind me, Arthur Vance was waiting in the wings. He held 2 glasses of vintage champagne. "You did good, kid," Arthur said, a rare, genuine smile breaking his stony face. "But I am done being your backer. I want to be your partner. 50-50 split. We run this city together. 50-50 sounds fair, I replied, taking the glass and clinking it against his. I looked down from the wings at the crowd below. I saw my new staff, the people I had saved, waving up at me. I felt a lightness in my chest that I had not felt in years. I was not the scorned wife. I was not the victim. I was the victor. As I stepped down the final stair, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a notification from the bank. Deposit received $50 million. I smiled, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and walked into my future. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story.